I'm going to start off by selecting a design to cut for my glass etching. So I go to my pattern collection, I go to the category where I know that my design is, I select the design and then I resize it. Now I know that I need to resize this to 50 millimeters so that it fits perfectly onto my glass. So I say OK. I don't want to cut the individual pieces, I want to cut the entire design, so I select that and say OK. I only want to cut one, so I set. So now there it is on my screen and I can move it to wherever I want it to be. However, what I would like to do is I want to mask off an area around this design that will not be etched on the glass. So I'm going to add another pattern and I'm going to select from my shapes the circle. So I scroll down till I get to my circle. You can choose any shape, but I want the circle. So now I know that this needs to also be resized to 60 millimeters in order to fit onto my glass. So I just quickly resize that, and then I only want one, so I say set. So there I now have my circle and I have my candy can, but I want the candy can inside the circle. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to edit, and I first need to group these two together. So I select the group option and I want to group everything that's on the page. So I select that option, and now you'll see I have a red block around the circle and around the candy cane, which means they are grouped. They are only temporarily grouped, however, but that is perfect for the next step. So I say OK, because now what I want to do is I want to align these two together. So I choose the Align tool, and I'm going to start off by aligning them first of all vertically. So in other words, these two must be aligned along the vertical axis. So I choose the vertical alignment option, and now you'll see they're perfectly aligned vertically. But to get the one inside the other, I also need to align them horizontally. So now I click on the horizontal tool and it's popped my candy can perfectly inside the circle. So I say OK, I'm happy with that, but they are still only temporarily grouped together. So if I try to move this design, it's going to only move one part at a time, and I want to be able to move the entire design. Now I know that they still are temporarily grouped because it still has the little red block around the candy can and the red block around the circle. So to make them one unit or one object, I'm going to select the group tool. So now it's put a block around the entire design, which means I can move that to wherever I want it to be, and the two of them are grouped together now permanently. Not quite permanently, because if I wanted to I could go back and ungroup them, but I want them together now, and the minute that I save them, so I go OK and I say save, and I save to the machine, it will tell me that this save is going to include a grouped pattern, and you cannot ungroup the pattern once you have saved it. But that's fine, I don't want to ungroup it, so I'm going to save it, and now they are grouped permanently together. So I'll just let it save it onto the machine, and then I say OK, and that is that. Now I'm ready to open that grouped design so that I can cut it. So I go to retrieve data. I've saved it onto my machine. So I just use the double-headed arrow to get to the last page, and there I find my design. So there it is, and you can see that if I click OK, it is completely grouped, so I can move it to wherever I want. However, what I do want to do is I want to cut 3 of these. So I'm going to go to edit, and then I'm going to go to object edit, and I'm going to say add, and I want to add another 2, making a total of 3. So I say OK, and there they are. So I can move them to wherever I want them. So now the next step is I'm going to say OK, and then I'm going to say OK again, because I'm finished doing everything that I want to do to these designs, because now I want to scan my mat in so that I can see where I have placed my vinyl that I want to cut, and then I'm going to drag and drop these onto the vinyl all ready to be cut. So now I have my standard tack mat, and I'm going to pop my vinyl onto that mat. Now this is what we call repositionable vinyl, and this is the vinyl that we use for glass etching, because you can move it around on the glass, so in case it doesn't get stuck down where you want it to be, it's easy to reposition. So I pop that down onto my mat, and then what I do is I take my felt squeegee and then I smooth that down. Now the felt squeegee does a perfect job of securing your vinyl to your mat and getting rid of any air bubbles. Now the next step is I'm going to load the mat into the machine and then drag and drop my design to cut. Now I'm ready to load the mat, so I've popped the mat into the machine. I always put my finger onto the mat on the little arrow just to guide it, and then I'm going to press load the mat button. So now that the mat is loaded, we need to scan the mat so that we know where to position our little designs on the vinyl that's on the mat. Now I can see where the vinyl is on the mat, and then I can just drag and drop these little designs so that they fit perfectly onto that vinyl, and that when they cut, they are actually cut out on the vinyl. And remember, you can always go back to your editing screen and go to zoom if you can't see perfectly nicely, and especially if you want to put your designs much closer together or fine-tune it. So the zoom button is always nice to know about. But now I'm quite happy that they are on my vinyl. And just another little tip, if you can't see your vinyl because it's white vinyl on a white mat, you can always go to your settings key and make sure that the background is displayed as the darkest version. So I'll just say OK, and remember, on the previous models of your scan and cut, that little spanner would be sitting on the side of your machine. So it's the same thing, it's just with the new machine they've built it in on the screen. So you would just go and press the button there to get to the settings so that you could change the background to display as the darkest version. So now I'm ready to cut, so I say OK, and then it says please select, and I'm going to select cut. Now with the new scan and cut SDX 1200, it's got the auto blade, which is going to just determine the thickness of the material that it's cutting, and it'll adjust itself. On the previous models, you need to adjust your blade depth and your cutting pressure so that it will cut your vinyl perfectly. But we also want to only cut the top part of the vinyl. We don't want to cut the paper backing. Now on the previous models, you would just do test cuts until you see that the machine is only cutting through the vinyl and not through the entire paper backing as well. However, on the SDX 1200, it has what is called the half cut feature. So I've already turned on the half cut, so it's only going to cut halfway through. In other words, only through the vinyl and not through the paper backing. So with the SDX machines, just make sure that you have turned the half cut on. I have adjusted my half cut pressure because my blade is getting a little bit blunt. So that's just another tip. When your blade starts getting a bit blunt, just increase your pressure slightly. So now I'm ready to cut, and I also always, irrespective of whether I know the settings or not, I always do a test cut first. So it puts the little test block there, and I'm going to just say start, and it's going to first cut the test block. Now with the SDX, it's calibrating itself and measuring the thickness. So there we go. So now I've cut that, and I'll just move this back slightly. So I'm going to take my little hook from my hook and spatula set, and then I'm going to just hook that little test piece, and I can see that it's cut it absolutely perfectly. So it's only cut through the vinyl, it hasn't cut through the paper backing, which is what I want. So I'm going to not have to select test again. I just select start, and now it's going to go and it's going to cut out my 3 designs. So there it's calibrating itself again, just measuring the thickness, and then off it's going to go. Once the machine is finished cutting, it'll say finished cutting. You'll say OK and unload the mat. Once the mat's unloaded, you're ready to start lifting off the excess vinyl from your cutting mat. So these are 2 invaluable little tools. They come as a set from Brothers, and they're part of the scan and cut range. So it's the hook and spatula set, and I'm going to show you how you would use these. Just a little tip, we want to remove all of the excess vinyl that we're not going to put onto our glass. So where that little test cut was, I always just hook my little hook in there and I slit the vinyl so that I've got a nice starting point. Then I don't have to fish around on the edges of the vinyl to find the starting point. Now once I've got that going, I just slide my little hook along there, and then I put my spatula in underneath, and then I just lift all the excess off. So now what's going to be left on the mat is the circles with the designs in them. So we just lift all of that off, and then that you can just pop into, I always keep a little bin handy and drop that in. Now what we want to do is we want to take out the excess from each of these candy cane designs that mustn't be part of our design. So I then take my little hook, and I'm just going to move my board so that you can see nicely, and I'll start working on this middle one because it'll be easier for you to see. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hook out the little actual candy cane itself, and I'm going to pull that off from the circle. So now I have just the little candy cane part. Now these make lovely little stencils. So what I do is I just keep a plastic filing wallet, and then what I do is just on the outside I pop them on there so that when I'm looking for little designs to use either as stencils, or I can use that for another glass etching project, I've got those bits there. So now what I'm left with here is the actual round part, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to lift this off of the cutting mat so that you can see. So I'll just quickly lift this off, and there you'll be able to see that I've got my circle that I'm going to place onto the glass, plus all the little inside bits of the candy cane, because I want to etch only that little section that's exposed. So now what I need to do is transfer this whole piece with its little bits onto my actual glass. So we'll have a look at that process next. Just another little tip, if you decide that you don't want to keep your excess bits and you want to throw them away, I always find I keep a little square of paper handy, and then I stick all my little bits and pieces on there. Otherwise they tend to stick all over the place, and then once you've finished with that piece of paper, you can just pop that into your bin. The next step is you just cut the paper backing so that you've got your designs each on a separate little piece like this, and you can trim them to size so that you only have your design on the actual paper. So there's one design per piece, because now we're going to start the process of transferring this design onto the glass. Now we're ready to lift the vinyl off of the backing paper and put it onto the glass. But in order to pick up all the little bits in one go, we're going to use transfer paper. Now the transfer paper you can buy from Sew & Craft. It comes on a 5-meter board and it's reusable as well. So this little piece that I've cut off of here, I can use several times over. So what I do is I use my cutting mat as my base because it just makes life a lot easier. So I stick my little design down back onto the cutting mat, and then I place my transfer paper over the design. Now to make sure that I pick up all the little bits, I take my felt squeegee and then I rub over the design just to make sure that the paper is stuck perfectly onto the vinyl. Now what I do is I take my little spatula and I slide that underneath the vinyl just to get it going, and then you just make sure that you're picking up all the little pieces onto the transfer paper as you go, and if there's a little bit that stays behind, you just gently lift it and make sure that it gets picked up with the paper. Then what I do is I just smooth that down a little bit to make sure it's fine, and there I have my whole piece ready to be stuck onto my glass to start the etching process. So you would do that with all of your designs and have them all mounted onto the paper, and you can actually just pre-prepare and keep them all ready. And then just another little tip, don't throw this little piece of paper away. I keep these in a wallet because, like for example, if there are bits that I want to save for other projects, I just stick them back onto this piece of paper. Just another quick extra tip, if you find that your vinyl isn't sticking onto your mat because you've used your mat quite a lot and it's lost its stickiness and you haven't got time to re-sticky the mat and you're in a hurry, then just take your MSA 1100 spray, and what I do is I've got a little box here that I call my glue box, and then I just lift its lid and then I pop my piece of vinyl inside and I just lightly spray onto the back of that vinyl. So you hold the can sort of 15 centimeters away, spray, close the box lid so that the glue doesn't go everywhere, and then it's easy enough just to pop your vinyl down and it won't move while you are busy cutting it. So you just smooth it down with your little felt squeegee, and then this will stay put while you're busy cutting. Now let's get organized so that we can etch onto our glass. Now in front of me I've got all of the things prepared that I'm going to need to use. The first one obviously would be a glass, and this is the glass that I'm going to etch on, and while I'm busy etching I will explain to you the different kinds of glass and how you would treat them with the etching cream. Then there is the actual cream that's going to do the etching. Now this is a water-based etching cream, and this is available from Sew & Craft. So just go onto the website and order it from there. You'll also see that when you get your little bottle of etching cream, while it looks like it's a little bottle, a little goes a long way, and I'm going to give you all hints and tips for it. You'll see that this bottle here, I haven't even used a third, and I have etched loads and loads of glass with that cream. Now the important thing is that all of the instructions are on the bottle, as well as the safety precautions and what you need to do while you're working with this product. But I will explain that during this video anyway. You're also going to need a paintbrush to apply the cream with. Then, to clean the glass before we etch it, it's important to use rubbing alcohol, and then also white spirit vinegar. Now that I apply to these little cotton wool pads, and then I clean the glass, because even though you think the glass may be clean, there might be a bit of soap residue or a bit of grease from hand cream or something like that on the glass, and if that glass is not properly prepared and cleaned using those two products, then you aren't going to get a good result. The other thing you're going to need is a little bit of press stick. So I'm going to show you what I'm going to do with the press stick just now, but that's over there for just now. Then once we are ready to etch, we're going to wear a pair of these disposable gloves. Now just a tip, what I do is I always buy the biggest ones that I can find. And the reason for that is that once you've got your gloves on and you've been working with these big gloves on your hands, you can easily slip them off, and then they are easy just to slip on again. Whereas I find if you buy the ones that fit your hands perfectly, it's difficult to get them on and off, and then you end up breaking them and end up having to use a second pair of gloves. So you only need one pair of these disposable latex gloves. Then you'll also need to have a towel. Now this towel is what I'm going to put the glass onto while I'm busy etching it, and I'll explain more about that just now. Then once the etching is finished, you're going to need to rinse the glass off with some soapy water. So I've got some soapy water in a plastic bowl, because remember that this is etching cream. So if you put this on your kitchen sink or any surface that is likely to get affected by etching cream, then it's going to etch it. So what I do is I just use a little plastic bowl, because obviously it won't etch plastic. You could also obviously just use any other kind of plastic bucket, but I like this little one because it's easy to keep here where I'm working. So I've got soapy water in there, and this is the cloth that I'm going to wash it with, and then I've got a cloth that I'm going to dry with. So here are all of the things that you're going to need to start your etching process. So let's apply the vinyl that we had cut out for our glass etching to the glass. But before we can do that, we're going to just take a little bit of the rubbing alcohol, and we're going to put it onto that little cotton pad, and we are going to rub that all over the area that we are going to put our little design. So you just give it a really, really, really good clean with the rubbing alcohol. And then what I like to do is, once the rubbing alcohol has been used, I then go and do the same with the white wine vinegar, and I rub that over the rubbing alcohol so that there are no traces of anything left on this glass. So I'll do that, and then once that's done, I'm going to show you how to apply the little vinyl cutout onto the glass. So here I have the glass, and I've cleaned it with the rubbing alcohol, and then I cleaned it with the spirit vinegar, and then I just waited for it to dry. Once it's dry, don't touch or handle the glass, because you might put some greasy marks onto there, and then that's going to affect the final product of your etching. So don't touch anywhere where you're going to put your design. So now I'm ready to pop the design on. I've already etched one part of the glass, and I want to repeat this design around this glass. So off I'm going to go, and then I can decide where I want to position this on my glass, on that cleaned off area. So this is where the repositionable vinyl comes in, because if you have now popped this into the wrong place, it's easy enough just to peel it off again. So I put that on, and because you can see through the transfer paper, it's easy to see that it is in the right position and that it's straight and all the rest of it. So there you should be able to see my little design on my glass. Now, to make sure that it is firmly adhered to the glass, you just take your little felt squeegee and rub over your transfer paper to make sure that the vinyl sticks onto the glass. Now we're going to simply just peel off the transfer paper, and then the vinyl remains on the glass like that. Now don't throw this piece of transfer paper away, because you can use this multiple times. So all that I do is I just pop it back onto the roll that I had cut it off of, and I use it over and over again. Now, just before I start the etching, this is just a little tip, just as a precautionary measure. I cut a few strips of that transfer tape, and then I pop them onto the glass where the etching cream may tend to be a little bit too close to the edge, because I'm going to apply etching cream only to this exposed area. Now, I'm being very careful not to touch the exposed area because it's already been cleaned and I don't want to contaminate it. So all I do is I just stick a couple of these little strips just across where I think it might just go over the edges. So that should be good enough. I'll just do 2 more little tiny strips here, and then I'm ready to apply my etching cream. So that's all masked off, because remember that wherever the etching cream touches, it's going to permanently etch the glass. So you don't want little bits to get onto places that are not to be etched. We only want it to be in that area. Now, just before you put your gloves on, take the 2 little blobs of press stick, and then what I do is I stick them down on my towel. Now, you can't do this when you've got your gloves on, because the press stick sticks to your gloves and drives you bananas. So just pop the press stick down without your gloves on, because what we're going to do is we're going to support the glass using those blobs of press stick. So now it can't roll around while we're busy working with it. So now it's time to put my gloves on. So now I've got my glass all balanced on those blobs of press stick, and then before I took the lid off of the etching cream, I gave the bottle a really good shake so that it's well mixed. Now I'm going to take my paintbrush, and we're not going to use it as a brush as such, we're going to use it more as an applicator, because what we're going to do is we're going to just gently place blobs of this etching cream over that exposed area that we would like to etch. Now it's important to actually make a fairly thick layer, almost so thick that you can't see the cutout design anymore. So just move the etching paste around with the tip of your brush. So we're not brushing it, we're actually just applying it and moving it around. So we'll just make sure that that is really well covered, because as I say, you actually don't want to be able to see your cutout design anymore. So we've got a really nice thick layer going on here. There we go. Right, so that now seems like it's fine. And then what you're going to do is any of the cream that remains on your brush, you're going to just pop back into your bottle. So just scrape it into there, because you don't want to waste any of it, and then immediately put the lid back onto the jar. Then what I do is I just take my paintbrush and I swish it around in the water, because there's not really much of the etching paste left on there, and just dry that off, and then it's ready for the next step, which is going to be in about 15 minutes time. because what we're going to do is we're going to leave this paste, and you can see it's very thick, this cream at least. It's very thick, so it doesn't run anywhere, and that's why I can just leave it to lie as it is. So this is why you can also use it on mirrors and things like that, because it's pretty thick, so it's not going to just easily run. But as I say, always just as a precaution, put little bits of the transfer tape on edges where you might get a little bit too close to the edge. Now this is going to stay on this glass for between 5 minutes and 15 minutes, and it just depends on the type of glass that you are etching. And remember, if it hasn't etched it properly, you can always go back and re-etch it. It's really not a problem. But I want to just show you the difference between glasses. You have a glass here that's fairly thin. Now if you're working with these thinner glasses, they are generally the better quality glass, purely because with the thicker glasses and things like honey jars and all those, they are mostly made of recycled glass, which is quite thick, and it's also not as pure as the thin glass is. So on a thin glass you can actually leave the etching cream on for about 5 minutes, although I never take a chance. I always leave it on for at least 10 minutes because it can't take off more than one layer anyway. But definitely on a thicker glass, like these cheap tumblers that you can buy at the supermarkets and all over, that I leave on for at least 20 minutes. Sometimes I even leave it on for half an hour. So I'm just going to leave this one here for 20 minutes, and then I'll show you the next step. Now we're ready to remove the etching cream, so I've put my gloves back on, and then I'm going to just poke the blobs of press stick away, because if you touch them with your gloves they stick to your gloves, so just use the paintbrush. Then I've opened my little jar of etching cream, and then all I'm going to do is I'm going to scrape all of that excess etching cream off. So you just scrape it away and put it back into your jar. So you're not going to be wasting anything, but just be careful not to go over the edges onto the glass that isn't to be etched, and that's why I also like to have the bits of tape there. So we just scrape that all off, as much as you can get off. You scrape off and pop back into the jar. Make sure you clean your brush off so that you don't waste anything, and that's why this cream goes such a long way. Now what we're going to do is close the jar immediately, and then before I do anything else I just swish my brush out in the water. So now my brush is clean for when I want to use it again later for another project. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this glass and I'm going to pop it into the water, and I'm just going to rinse it off with my cloth, and then pull off all of the bits of tape, and then we're ready to remove all of the little bits that are left on here. So we're going to just, they peel off pretty easily. There we go. So just peel those all off. And then I also have a bin liner underneath my tub of water, just so that if anything splashes it doesn't go everywhere. And then you pull off that repositionable vinyl, and there is your etching. Now once it dries it becomes more obvious. When it's wet it's not as visible, but once it's dry and completely dry, air dried, then you see it absolutely perfectly. So now what I would do is, while this glass is still nice and clean, if I wanted to go and do another design on the other side, I would once again just quickly go and fetch my rubbing alcohol, clean it, put a bit of vinegar on, put a design on and etch it, and I would work my way around that glass. So you can put as many designs onto your glass as you like, or as few. And obviously you could put a whole lot of different designs. You could put initials. So if it's a special occasion, you could cut out initials and dates, etc., using your scan and cut, and then etch it permanently using the etching cream. Now you can quite safely dispose of this water, as there's very little etching cream in the water. So what I always do is I have at least 6 or 7 centimeters of water, and you saw how we put the etching cream onto the glass in a thick layer, but we actually scraped just about all of it off before we rinsed it. So there's very little etching cream that would have contaminated this water.